Thomas Jefferson spent most of his life in public service. He often wrote that he longed to return to his home, here at Monticello.
Monticello, located near Charlottesville, Virginia, is the historic plantation home of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. Designed by Jefferson himself, the house is an iconic example of neoclassical architecture, featuring a distinctive dome, portico, and Palladian elements. Construction began in 1768 and continued over several decades, with Jefferson experimenting with various design and technological innovations. Monticello was not only Jefferson's residence, but also a working plantation where he grew crops and conducted agricultural experiments. The estate, which was worked by enslaved individuals, became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, recognized for both its architectural significance and its role in American history. Today, Monticello serves as a museum and educational site where visitors learn about Jefferson's life, his ideas, and the complex legacy of slavery on the estate. Guests entered the entrance hall when arriving at Monticello. This room highlighted Jefferson's wide-ranging interests and dedication to learning about the world around him. In this room, visitors viewed artifacts of American natural history, Western civilization, and American Indian cultures while they waited for a chance to greet the former president. Showcasing the objects in this room demonstrated Jefferson's belief that knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, knowledge is happiness, and that knowledge should be shared among the people in a democratic state. One of Monticello's iconic features is the Great Clock, designed by Jefferson, built by Peter Spruck in 1792, and fully functional today. The clock, with both an interior and exterior face, regulated the schedule of the entire plantation, inside the house and out. On the outside wall, the clock has a single hand to incrementally mark the hour. The inside face of the clock hour and minute hands, with a smaller sweep second hand, reveals Jefferson's desire for precision. The Great Clock is driven by two sets of cannonball-like weights, which hang on both sides of the front doors. On Sundays, the clock is wound with the help of a folding ladder, and the weights are raised to the ceiling. The top ball right-hand set of weights reveals the day, and even the approximate hour as it falls past markers on the wall, with Sunday at the top and Saturday at the bottom. The clock is also attached to a Chinese gong that chimes the hour. In the 18th century, the gong rang loudly enough for those in the fields to hear it 3 miles away. There is a hitch, however. When the weights arrived at Monticello for installation, it was discovered that the height of the entrance hall was shorter than the length of the ropes. Jefferson's solution? To allow the weights to descend naked till they get to the floor, where they may enter a square hole and go to the cellar floor. The holes were cut, the weights were hung, and the marker for Saturday may be found on the basement level of the house. Thomas Jefferson's interest in a mastodon fossil, discovered in Virginia in the 1790s, marked an early chapter in American paleontology. Jefferson, a keen naturalist, believed the fossilized bones belonged to a giant extinct creature, challenging the prevailing view that all animals were as described in the Bible. His research and communication with scientists helped identify the remains as those of a mastodon, not a megatherium. Jefferson supported excavations at Big Bone Lick and used the discovery to promote scientific inquiry in the U.S., contributing to the growth of paleontology in America. Moving through the South Square sitting room, guests enter the library. Jefferson reorganized his private suite of rooms after he sold his vast personal collection of books, maps, and pamphlets to Congress in 1815. At one point, Jefferson owned over 6,000 books. However, he agreed to sell them after the British burned down the Library of Congress during the War of 1812. Jefferson referred to this room as the library thereafter, and here he likely received incoming mail, stored books and scientific apparatuses, and designed the University of Virginia, which he called the hobby of my old age, at his French architect's table. Among the special surviving Jefferson possessions are an astronomical tall case clock, chairs from New York and Paris, and an octagonal table. Early in the 1800s, there were multiple printers vying for the patent to be the one to print the official copies of the Declaration of Independence. All of these printers sent their test copies to Jefferson, hoping to get the seal of approval. The one on display inside of Monticello is an original Benjamin Owen Tyler engraving from 1818. The bedchamber is the most private space of an intensely private man. Jefferson's regimen of rising in the morning and retiring in the evening all took place in this room filled with his most personal possessions, away from visitors and most family. With an eye toward comfort and convenience, Jefferson furnished his chamber with stylish silk curtains, marble-top tables, and upholstered armchairs from his house in Paris. These imported furnishings mixed well with the Virginia-made bureau his wife used during their marriage and furniture made at Monticello. It was in the alcove bed in this room where Jefferson spent his last hours, passing away on July 4, 1826, 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. Family and friends would gather in the parlor for games, music, and conversation, and it was the site of weddings, dances, and other important social events. It held most of Jefferson's art collection, including portraits of many people whom he admired or considered noteworthy. Among the portraits represented are key figures in Jefferson's thinking and in American and world history. Jefferson displayed portraits of the three greatest men that have ever lived: Sir Francis Bacon, Sir Isaac Newton, and Sir John Locke, as well as Jefferson's contemporary, Benjamin Franklin. Also represented are the 5 explorers of the New World: Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, Hernan Cortés, Ferdinand Magellan, and Sir Walter Raleigh. Next are the first 3 presidents of the United States: George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. Lastly, French nobleman and military officer Marquis de Lafayette, a friend of Jefferson who came to America during the American Revolution to help fight in the Revolutionary War. Unique to Monticello and also for the time period are the self-operating doors of the parlor. The doors work by using a bicycle chain-like mechanism that forms a figure 8 under the threshold. By closing one door, the chain will then catch and cause both doors to be closed simultaneously. Another painting that Jefferson had on display is called Salome, bearing the head of St. John the Baptist. Jefferson was very passionate about the idea of separation of church and state and religious freedom. Pieces of art like this were used to start that conversation amongst guests. A few years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson wrote the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, which would separate church and state in Virginia. In many ways, this laid the groundwork for the First Amendment in our Bill of Rights. Jefferson once said, "It makes no difference to me whether my neighbor believes in 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." Two controversial figures represented in this room are Napoleon Bonaparte and Tsar Alexander of Russia. This marble bust of Napoleon Bonaparte shows him as a young, lean soldier and consul leader of France, prior to his rise as emperor in 1804. An unknown studio created this bust, basing it on a model the sculptor Louis-Simon Boiseau created for the Manufacture Nationale de Sèvres, debuting in 1802. There is no record of how Jefferson obtained this bust, but it was installed in a prominent location in the parlor at Monticello. Jefferson received a plaster copy of a bust of Tsar Alexander of Russia as a gift from the American Consul General at St. Petersburg Leavitt Harris in 1804. Harris, like Jefferson, held a high opinion of the monarch, whose greatness and goodness which he so remarkably unites. Jefferson's instructions in 1806 were to place the bust of Alexander in the then unfinished cabinet. Later, to dramatize the contrast between evil and virtue, the bust of Alexander was installed opposite Napoleon's likeness, flanking the parlor doors to the west portico. Jefferson began to correspond with Alexander in 1804, 3 years after his accession to the throne. He believed that Alexander was a person of noble character with Enlightenment values, and wrote laudatory comments about him to many people. Although Jefferson was full of optimism for what Alexander might accomplish, his reign was far from the success that Jefferson envisioned. In the dining room, Jefferson, his family, and many guests took meals twice a day. Common to the time, Jefferson used folding tables so that, after meals were finished, the room could be used to entertain. Enslaved workers served Jefferson's family and guests, but he used gadgets built into the architecture to minimize the number of enslaved waitstaff present, including a dumbwaiter for wine and a revolving food service door, concealed in a niche along the wall. When Jefferson went to France in 1784 to serve as the U.S. minister there, he brought with him James Hemings, a member of the enslaved community at Monticello, to be trained as a chef. From that point on, the food at Jefferson's table had a marked French influence. In 1824, Daniel Webster noted that dinners at Monticello were served in half Virginian, half French style, in good taste and abundance. While in Paris, Jefferson became accustomed to the French practice of using dumbwaiters, so much so that he installs these dumbwaiters into both sides of the fireplace mantel. A weight drops and a bottle rises from the wine cellar directly below the dining room. Just outside of the dining room is a revolving door with shelves on it. When the food is ready to serve, it is brought upstairs, loaded on the shelf, and the door turns into the room. In 1806, Jefferson's friend and teacher, George Wythe, died, leaving him a bequest that included his silver cups. Correspondence between the executor of Wythe's estate and President Jefferson reveals that there were 2 cups, but provides no further description. They might have had outmoded Rococo decoration. For that or another reason, Jefferson decided to have them melted down. The Wythe cups and 2 of Jefferson's own cans were converted into a new set of 8 tumblers in 1810. The tea room served as a place for overflow seating during meals, as well as a reading and writing area for the Jefferson family. The coldest room in the house, the tea room housed a now-missing stove in the semicircular niche. Jefferson referred to the tea room as his most honorable suite, where he displayed likenesses of friends and revolutionary heroes such as Lafayette, Washington, Franklin, and Paul Jones. The elliptical arch into the tea room from the dining room features 2 sets of pocket doors that slide into the wall and a transom that is filled in with glass on both sides. The pocket doors are designed to admit light into the dining room and reduce the exchange of warm and cold air from one room to the other. Although both the North and South pavilions were elements in Jefferson's designs of the 1770s from Monticello, it was not until 1808 that his scheme was fully realized with the completion of this structure. After Jefferson's daughter Martha and her family moved permanently to Monticello in 1809, this room was used as an office by her husband, Thomas Mann Randolph. In May 1819, the North Pavilion was partially destroyed by fire. Everyone on the mountaintop covered the wooden terrace with snow taken from the ice house nearby, thus saving the main house from destruction. Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia in 1819. He considered the founding of the university to be one of his greatest achievements. Jefferson designed the Academical Village, a terraced green space surrounded by residential and academic buildings, gardens, and the majestic center point, the rotunda. The most recognizable symbol of the university, the rotunda stands at the north end of the lawn and is half the height and width of the Pantheon in Rome, which was the primary inspiration for the building. If you look through the hole in the trees, you are able to see the rotunda from the North Pavilion. A pond was built near the South Pavilion, a structure better known today as the Honeymoon Cottage, where Jefferson and his wife Martha first lived on the mountain. In his earliest notes about Monticello's gardens, Jefferson envisioned a fish pond to be visible from the house. While his goal was a water feature to adorn the garden, the pond could also store water. The Garden Club of Virginia restored today's fish pond on the West Lawn in 1940, but whether the pond ever held fish is unknown. The cellar level of the Monticello house was a horizontal and vertical crossroads constantly in motion. Here, enslaved domestic workers, Jefferson family members, slaves accompanying Monticello visitors, wagoners delivering supplies, and anyone else using Monticello's workspaces crossed paths. Domestic work in the Monticello house is the focus of Crossroads, the exhibition installed in the house's central cellar, adjacent to the wine cellar and directly beneath the entrance hall. Visitors get a sense of the constant interaction and activity required to keep Monticello running. Life-size figures in the space present, enslaved butler Burwell Colbert, Jefferson's daughter and plantation mistress Martha Jefferson Randolph, Priscilla Hemings, chief nurse to Jefferson's grandchildren, Israel Gillette, a teenage house servant, Betty Brown, a seamstress and lady's maid who spent more time working in slavery at Monticello than any other person, and Harriet Hemings, an enslaved girl who learned needlework and other skills from her female relatives. Each figure is accompanied by a museum case of archaeologically recovered objects representing items they may have worn, carried in their pockets, or used in their jobs, including shoe buckles, a pocket knife, beads and earrings, thimbles, scissors, pins, and an iron. The South Pavilion is the oldest building on the mountaintop, completed in 1770. Its basement housed Monticello's kitchen until 1809, when 3 feet of fill was dumped into it, raising the floor to match the level of the newly completed south wing, which included a new kitchen. This kitchen was among the best equipped in Virginia. While serving as U.S. Minister to France, Jefferson purchased a large number of cooking utensils for his residence in Paris. In the early 1790s, as part of an 86-crate shipment of goods, he had them shipped back to America and eventually to Monticello. While the cellar of the South Pavilion housed Monticello's first relatively small kitchen, a second kitchen was constructed during the expansion of the house. The newer, much larger workspace featured a bake oven, a fireplace, and an 8-opening stew stove with integrated set kettle. At Monticello, beer was a table liquor served during dinner, and Jefferson's earliest designs for his plantation included spaces for brewing and the storage of beer. The beer cellar tells the story not only of beer and brewing at Monticello, but also of its various brewers like Joseph Miller, English sailor, and Peter Hemings, Monticello slave. As one of the most knowledgeable wine enthusiasts in the country, Thomas Jefferson served as wine advisor to Presidents Washington, Madison, and Monroe. His cellar was filled with wines from France, Portugal, Spain, Hungary, Germany, and Italy, reflecting tastes he acquired during his European travels. Jefferson sometimes imported several hundred bottles per year. He preferred bottles to casks because bottles ensured that the wine could not be adulterated by wine merchants or by crewmen on board a vessel during shipment. Jefferson's winding walk and the accompanying flower border were laid out in the spring of 1808. A sketch of his design also included 4 large oval-shaped areas that were to be planted with flowering shrubs. However, it is not known if these were ever installed. By 1812, Jefferson needed a more systematic organization of the border and so divided the beds into 10-foot sections, each compartment numbered and planted with a different flower. The winding walk and border is not a traditional garden, which usually suggests a room outside, an enclosed retreat. Jefferson's flower beds and borders are exposed to the elements, open to the central Virginia landscape, intimately balanced with what he called the workhouse of nature. Clouds, hail, rain, thunder, all fabricated at our feet. The winding, relaxed lines of the walkway reflect Jefferson's interest in the latest, informal style of landscape design, which he had admired during his visit to English gardens in 1786. Monticello's West Lawn, which features the nickel view of the house, is an icon of American landscapes. The winding walk defines the perimeter of the leveled, oval-shaped West Lawn. The smooth, level lawn was a favorite playground for the children. Although the earliest images of the west front of Monticello reveal a weedy, disheveled surface, the lawn was probably scythed once or twice a year, and its appearance inevitably reflected the pre-lawn mower technology of the early 19th century. The vegetable garden evolved over many years, beginning in 1770 when crops were first cultivated along the contours of the slope. Terracing was introduced in 1806, and by 1812, gardening activity was at its peak. The 1,000-foot-long terrace, or garden plateau, was literally hewed from the side of the mountain with slave labor, and it was supported by a massive stone wall that stood over 12 feet in its highest section. One contemporary visitor remarked on the dramatic sea view across the rolling Piedmont countryside. The main part of the 2-acre garden is divided into 24 squares, or growing plots, and at least in 1812, the squares were arranged according to which part of the plant was being harvested, whether fruits, like tomatoes and beans, roots, beets and carrots, or leaves, lettuce and cabbage. The site and situation of the garden enabled Jefferson to extend the growing season into the winter months and provided an amenable microclimate for tender vegetables, such as the French artichoke. The garden, as well as the orchard, was surrounded by a 10-foot-high wooden or paling fence, which ran for nearly 3/4 of a mile. While the fence was constructed primarily as a defense against domestic animals and deer, the boards were placed so near as not to let even a young hare in. Adjacent to the vegetable garden is Mulberry Row. Named for the mulberry trees planted along it, Mulberry Row was the center of plantation activity at Monticello from the 1770s until Jefferson's death in 1826. Enslaved, free, and indentured workers and craftsmen lived and worked along Mulberry Row, which changed over time to accommodate the varying needs of Monticello's construction and Jefferson's household and manufacturing initiatives. Changing over time as structures were built, removed, or repurposed, Mulberry Row had more than 25 workshops, dwellings and storage buildings for weavers, spinners, blacksmiths, carpenters, joiners, and domestic servants. Thomas Jefferson is buried at Monticello with other members of his family in a gravesite he chose in 1773. This plot is owned by an association of Jefferson's descendants and is still used as a cemetery to this day. Before his death, Thomas Jefferson left explicit instructions regarding the monument to be erected over his grave. In this undated document, Jefferson supplied a sketch of the shape of the marker and the epitaph with which he wanted it to be inscribed. On the faces of the obelisk, the following inscription, and not a word more: "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Because by these were," he explained, "as testimonials that I have lived, I wish most to be remembered." The Robert H. and Clarice Smith Gallery houses 4 innovative exhibitions offering Monticello visitors fresh perspectives on Thomas Jefferson's Monticello and the enduring significance of Jefferson's life and ideas. Using interactive technologies, the exhibits present the famous words of Jefferson, the art and architecture of Monticello, and Jeffersonian ideals. The Monticello House and Plantation was the testing ground for Jefferson's ideas on improving various aspects of life through the application of social, intellectual, economic, and technological advances. These exhibitions place Monticello within the context of Jefferson's beliefs about individual life, society, and government, and explain that while in the public sphere he sought to guide the direction of the new nation he helped create, Monticello was his private experiment. The final exhibit includes a rare engraving of the Declaration of Independence. The American Declaration of Independence is crucial because it marked the formal break of the 13 colonies from Great Britain, asserting their right to self-governance. It also laid out key principles of human rights, equality, and liberty, famously stating that all men are created equal with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document not only justified the American Revolution, but also united the colonies with a common cause. Its impact extends globally, inspiring movements for freedom and justice around the world. Join us next time as we continue our adventures.